Hi, my name is Erin and welcome to my Learn Tarotology YouTube channel. Today we're going to be looking at some of the astrological archetypes that are expected to aspect one another in the coming month in my November 2020 Tarot Astro Forecast. So let's dive on in, shall we? The first aspect that we're going to be looking at is actually on November 1st. So we're kicking off the month already with something happening in the cosmos. So November is going to be fairly big as we're getting into the end of 2020 and getting ready for the big shift that's going to be occurring next month. So this will be really setting the stage for December. So let's look at November 1st, which is Mercury, which is still retrograde on the 1st, in Libra, squaring Saturn in Capricorn. In terms of tarot, we have Mercury as the magician now. It's retrograde, so we're going to consider that to be reversed magician, sort of reversed energy. A retrograde basically is any time that you have a planet that appears to be moving backwards in the sky. So it looks almost like it's losing ground as we're looking in the chart. So it seems to be moving backwards through space and in its orbit. And so whenever we have a planet that is retrograding, it's almost a time to focus on all of the the research, the reflect, the refrain. And so this is sort of a time for us to rethink some of our contracts, some of our communications, if we can, and postpone them to a time when Mercury is direct again. And so while we have this Mercury magician energy in the reverse position, well, we think of the magician and we think about the tarot. The magician is our ego. He is the master of the elements. It is the phrase, as above, so below. And so this also represents the orator, the individual who's very skilled with their knowledge and with their communication. And that's how we get the association with Mercury in there. So how do we use those skills for personal power? How do we use our communication for personal power? And again, right now, we're looking at the magician reversed in Libra. And Libra is represented in the tarot by the Justice card. And justice is about balance, big picture balance. It's about looking at everything and weighing its merits, its pros and cons. And Libra especially we think of relationships and harmony. And so when we look at the Justice card, you can think of it in terms of judging the merits of a relationship and determining if we want to be in relation with someone. And then we have a square happening with Saturn in Capricorn. And Saturn is the world in our tarot, in terms of tarot. And that has to do more with, I think, the fact that in the associations originally that were given to the planets and the zodiac signs with the tarot, they were originally assigned based on traditional planets that ended with Saturn. And the world ends the major arcana. And it's the idea of cycles and completion and finishing one stage of growth and getting ready to step into the next stage. So once you've finished the major arcana, you end with the world and you get ready to begin again the next cycle, the next pattern of growth with the Fool. And that correlates very well with the idea of the Saturn return. When we experience that Saturn return in our charts is once we've seen a full cycle of life and we've learned our lessons and we're expected to grow from them. And then we're ready to start another cycle and either relearn some of those lessons we didn't learn the first time or perhaps, manage much better with some of the obstacles that we encounter. Saturn is currently in Capricorn, so it's hanging out in some pretty heavy earth energy where it will be for a little bit longer. And Capricorn in the tarot is the Devil card. And the Devil is about materialism. It is about being held back from something, being restrained. It's the victim consciousness, the idea of something holding you back and holding you down. And it can also be our faith as well, because it takes a great deal of faith. It takes a great deal of creativity to get through that sort of victimization and to get out of that situation. And so this archetypal energy that we have here in this particular aspect that we're seeing in the cosmos on November 1st, it is that of wanting to escape this cycle of consumerism or this reliance on the material that's the heavy earth, right? That's been holding us back. And so that we can find that equilibrium, use our thoughts, use our words, use our minds, use our voices to communicate in such a way that we can either escape these cycles of victimization or somehow achieve a more harmonious, equal footing in our relationships with others. So that's kind of how we're starting off the month. And then on November 3rd, thankfully, our Mercury retrograde, our magician reversed, goes direct. So I mentioned a little bit earlier about what retrograde means, and we already talked about what all of the Mercury associations are and what the Libra associations are. So this is good to know that Mercury is finally able to right itself on November 3rd, which for those of us in the United States and those of us around the world is a pretty big date. The U.S. presidential election will be held that day. And so, that is a political contest that has been fraught with judicial implications, right, and concerns. And I do want to say that with Mercury going direct, that is not going to be a panacea. It is not going to be an instant light switch. Everything's cured. Mercury will still be in its shadow until mid-November, but it's good to see that the magician is now full power, able to demonstrate mastery over communication. Hopefully we're going to start seeing that our thought processes are now working with the present energies rather than against them. So communication finally beginning to get back into balance. Although, again, still in that shadow until mid-November. Again, I mentioned that square was going to happen once Mercury goes direct and, starts moving forward again. It's going to hit that Saturn, so we will see that playing out the first week once more. Then we get to November 9th. And November 9th is going to be an interesting Venus in Libra opposite Mars in Aries. And so we have both of these planets in their respective signs. And Venus is our Empress energy. Okay. Venus is the feminine, and the Empress is the feminine material. It is our fertility, our creativity. It is that desire to bring things to fruition and to nurture them. It is beauty and the arts and children. And Libra, as we discussed earlier about balance, big picture. And that's going to be in opposition to Mars in Aries. So Mars, we have in terms of tarot, the Tower. Now at this point, we talked about retrograde. Mars is retrograde in Aries. So it's not a fully functional, unfortunately, it's a blocked tower. We see the tower as something that shakes us to our foundation, right? Shakes us to our core and requires us to seek out expertise and guidance and outside opinion so that we can navigate this tower strike. It is not something, we are generally well equipped to just deal with and be okay and brush it off. No, this is a bigger impact on us. And the good news about a tower strike, and I know people like to hate on the tower, but the good news about that tower is that it does contain a bit of a promise that once you navigate and get through whatever that is, whatever that hurdle or obstacle is, that you're going to come out of it better than if you hadn't experienced it in the first place. So it's a rough ride, but it's part of the growth process. It's part of the journey. And so when it's reversed, we see that there's that action, that energy, that upheaval, but it is stifled. It is repressed. And so we can't have, if we're having that muted energy, we can't have that catharsis, right? The dam's not open. The floodgates aren't open. It's just all, held in, pent up. And then we have it in Aries, the Emperor. And 2020 is the year of the Emperor, and unfortunately the dysfunctional Emperor. I've talked about that in my podcast, about how the 2020 energy is boundaries, and boundaries in the worst possible sense this year, unfortunately. But the Emperor can also be our big picture plan, right? And taking action to execute that big picture plan. And so in this particular opposition, we can kind of see with the Venus, Mars opposing each other in their own respective houses, it's a bit of a battle of the sexes almost. We see that there's the balance and the harmony and the fairness related to the feminine material. So things related to women maybe, or women's issues or relationships in women, opposing this masculine energy of Mars that is just repressed right now. It's trying to get things done, and it's just unable to reach that climax that it needs for that release and ultimately for growth. And so it's going to be a little bit of a tension there, and see, how that plays out. Then November 12th, we have Jupiter conjunct Pluto in Capricorn. Again, those heavy planets in Capricorn that we're going to get out of there next month. But for now, we're still dealing with them. Okay, so we have Jupiter in the tarot. We're talking about the Wheel of Fortune. We're talking about fate. We're talking about chance. We're talking about things that are outside of our control. And Jupiter is growth and expansion, right? So we're talking about potentially bigger things that are outside of our control. Usually it's positive. With the Wheel of Fortune, inheritances, windfalls, but it definitely can be negative things as well. Pure chance and pure things that are outside of our control. But I think if we're looking at Jupiter specifically, we're talking more about the growth, the expansion, the benefic, and the idea of fortune. Pluto actually has no corresponding tarot card based on the traditional astrology and the correspondences that were assigned by the Golden Dawn that have sort of stuck with the Rider-Waite tradition. But it just so happens that in modern astrology, there are 12 houses and 10 planets instead of the 7 that were used in traditional astrology, the 5 visible planets and the 2 luminaries. And so we can assign the 3 remaining planets, the 3 outer planets, to the 3 cards in the major arcana that were not previously assigned. So it just so happens to work out that Pluto corresponds well with the Judgment card. So Judgment is the last of the discernment cards in the major arcana, and it is all about judging and being judged, but hearing a calling and purpose. It's all about purpose. And when we think of Pluto, we think of power and transformation. We think of rebirth and cycles, and we think of the underworld and Hades. The idea of judgment in that regard, and the idea of did I fulfill my calling? Did I serve a higher purpose? And so I think that there's some merit with that particular association. Then we have Capricorn, which I mentioned earlier, the devil. And so when we have this conjunction of Jupiter and Pluto, well, Jupiter, again, makes things larger. It's expansion, it's growth. So we've expanded our view on our material society, right? Capricorn, the devil, and on our victim consciousness, the devil, and our need to escape from these trappings and move away from it and move toward that Pluto, that higher purpose. How can I transform myself so that I am, maximizing my power? How am I doing something larger for a higher purpose? How am I listening and hearkening to that call? So I think that that's something to think about, how that may play out for you around that November 12th time frame. Again, these are just archetypal energies that they can manifest in many different ways, and this is just one possible way that I'm seeing based on these archetypes. So I'd like to hear from you and how it plays out for you. Then we move into the middle of the month, November 14th, and there's a lot going on then. So November 14th, we have Mars is finally going direct. 6 months that Mars is in Aries. Goodness. So we have our Mars finally going direct. So we discussed what the Tower card meant earlier. We discussed what Emperor was earlier. So he's going direct in Aries. So the Tower card writes itself, and finally that's our first step towards that release we need. We can finally start moving forward, can get to that power strike that we need to get us to a better stage. So finally getting some progress, I hope. Similarly, on November 14th and into the 15th, depending on where you are in the world, we are going to have a new moon in Scorpio. The moon is the fastest moving, I would say planet, but really it's a satellite, but it's the fastest moving body. And so the new moon is the stage at which the moon passes in front of the sun, essentially obscuring it from our view. So we don't see the reflection. That's why we don't see the moon on a new moon. We don't see the light because it's not reflecting the sun's light. During a new moon, there are no luminaries visible in the night sky. And this, especially if you're going to be doing any tarot work, I would encourage you to do some intention setting around the phases of the moon. So the new moon is a great time to prepare for what you want to do either during the whole moon cycle, so from one new moon to the next new moon. Also, you can focus on the growing cycle and what you want to bring to your life. What do you want to grow? What do you want to expand as we get more and more light each day in the night sky? What do you want to add? What do you want to bring to your life? So just sort of being intentional, and especially when you set questions to your tarot cards, thinking about how to phrase things, taking advantage of the energies in play. The sun is the sun. No real surprise there. The sun is represented by the sun card. And the sun in the tarot is illumination. It's enlightenment over time and growth over time. And commitment. The sun rises every day and sets every night. But it's going to be back the next day. And truth. It brings things to the light. And then the moon is actually not the moon. It corresponds with the high priestess. There's another correspondence for the moon card. And the high priestess is knowing. It's intuition, high intuition. It is one of the cards of discernment I mentioned, along with justice and judgment. Those are the 3 discernment cards. It's about secrets and mysteries and about just the feminine mystique. And so we have the sun and the high priestess together, and they're in Scorpio. And Scorpio is death. And that's transformation. Death and rebirth, new growth, and dying to the way things were. End of one chapter, beginning of the next chapter. So a lot of those deep things that we think about and associate with Scorpio. And so perhaps during this time, maybe there are some secrets that we suspect exist that we haven't yet seen come to light, or Scorpio deals with secrets, or so does the high priestess. And so maybe this indicates that on the whole, collectively, we are preparing for the end of the year and the new chapter. Although maybe it isn't quite visible to us yet. We know that it's coming. We know that the end of one cycle is coming. The beginning of this new cycle is about to start. And so again, between this period, we definitely want to set our intentions on what do we want to call to us to support us during this transition that's going to be happening. And we'll see it as we get to the end of the month, especially when we get to the eclipse and the beginning of the eclipse season. So paying attention to the moon cycle and phases of the moon is something I strongly encourage those of us who practice tarot for ourselves or that read tarot for friends and family or others. Definitely pay attention to the phases of the moon and try and see if incorporating that into your intention setting or question phrasing, if that helps you any. Then, sorry, I have my notes here. Too many notes. It's like I'm going to forget something. Okay, then November 17th happens, and we have Mercury in Scorpio in opposition to Uranus in Taurus. So we talked already about Mercury and what that means, and we talked about Scorpio and what that means, so we can dive right into Uranus and Taurus. Uranus is also one of the outer planets that was not assigned a card. We can assign Uranus to the Fool. The Fool card is our new beginnings. It's our hope, right? It's hopeful. It is, new cycles and taking a step in a new direction, perhaps doing something on one's own, doing something independently, something that seems unique or maybe even foolish to others. And that way we can associate it with Uranus, the rebel, the revolutionary, the independent, the individual. And in Taurus, and Taurus is our Hierophant. And the Hierophant is the community, the pillars of the community, pillars of society, institutions, law and order, and systems, including computer systems. I think in this aspect, we can expect, Mercury as the messenger, to manifest as the messenger. So perhaps unexpected news or communications, something that frees us up in some way so that we can let go of something else, the Death card, Scorpio. So we can let go of something and move in a new direction, that Fool, the Uranus. Perhaps in 2021, because that does actually happen to be the year of the Hierophant coming up next year in Tarotology. But also, it could be something unexpected related to systems, institutions in general, or systems in general, computer systems. And then on November 21st, we're starting to get towards the end of the month here, and Venus enters Scorpio and the Sun enters Sagittarius. The two ingresses are happening with some of our faster moving planets, the Sun, the luminary, and Venus, personal planet. So on the same day. And we mentioned Venus as the Empress, Scorpio, the Death card. With that combination, I think we can see sort of planting the seeds for future growth, beauty, and what is to come during this Venus and Scorpio period. Seeds because of the violent nature in which they burst forth from their casings and start to take root and start to grow. So that's the idea of the death and rebirth. And the Sun, which we discussed previously, is going into Sagittarius, our Temperance card in the tarot. And that's philosophy, alchemy, transmutation. Usually people will say moderation with temperance, and there is an element of that, but I would say it's more about finding a middle way, understanding when to yield and do nothing versus when to act. Sometimes inaction is a form of action. This is a time for us to start engaging in that deeper thought, bringing philosophy and temperance to the forefront, maybe shining light on different philosophies and how to reconcile them throughout that Sun and Sagittarius season. November 23rd, Mercury in Scorpio forms a trine with Neptune in Pisces. So Neptune has also no major arcana currently assigned to it based on the traditional system, but it conveniently happens to leave us with one card left that we have not assigned, and that is the Hanged Man for Neptune, which if we think about the Hanged Man, we think about this association with martyrdom for both the card and also the planet of Neptune. Pausing to get a new perspective or understanding. The card can also represent accidents or illnesses or injuries or setbacks or anything that causes us to sort of pump the brakes a little bit and take that time out to appreciate another viewpoint, right? We don't really appreciate health and vitality until we don't have it. So it's walking in another's shoes and gaining some of that empathy, understanding, and compassion. Now, right now, Neptune is retrograde. So it is reversed, and now it's actually a right side up man, not a hanged man. In reversed, we have the blockages. And Pisces is the moon in the tarot. Now, some people may say Cancer as well. Sometimes there might be a crab or something in the card, and I can understand why people would want to put Cancer with the moon as well. But in the traditional assignments and correlations, Pisces is our moon card. And it's everything that we associate with the moon can be encapsulated within the moon card. Feelings, cycles, dreams, illusions, fantasies, intuition, confusion or depression, that feeling out of balance. So I think during this time, we are really struggling to sort of see and think clearly, get that fog out of the way, see clearly so we can embrace that new way of thinking. This is kind of also, I think, a time for daydreams or idyllic thoughts, but the action is missing during that little period when we have that particular configuration of planets going on. Then we get to November 27th, and this is going to be our penultimate aspect that we're going to talk about today. And that is Venus in Scorpio in opposition to Uranus in Taurus. And we already talked a lot about Uranus in Taurus and Venus in Scorpio and what they represent in the tarot. We can sort of expect sudden things, possibly related to possessions. Our relationships with others, other women maybe, or possibly that sudden endings and then new beginnings with the Scorpio death and Uranus, the Fool cards. So it's going to be, I'm excited to see how that plays out for people. So if you want to leave me a comment, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that one and how that plays out for you. And finally, that brings us to the big event as we get ready for December 2020, the December to remember. November 30th, we have that full moon penumbral lunar eclipse in Gemini. It is going to be great to get into the Gemini-Sag axis, out of that Cancer-Capricorn axis that we've had for the past several eclipse seasons. So let's review lunar eclipses just a little bit. So they occur when the moon enters the Earth's shadow. Lunar eclipse, sorry. But it is a penumbral lunar eclipse. And so lunar eclipses, one of the unique things about them is that they can be viewed anywhere on the Earth. So unlike solar eclipses. This is, as I mentioned earlier, the first eclipse that moves us out of that Cancer, Capricorn, and water Earth axis into the Gemini, Sagittarius, air and fire axis. So it's going to be, I think, a preview of what is to come on December 21st once we really move into that air age. And the effects of an eclipse, they tend to be a little more long lasting. So for this eclipse, it might kind of set the stage for the next 6 months until the next eclipse season. So really, what do you want to manifest in this eclipse season? And start setting your intentions and planting the seeds for what you would like to see come about, 6 months from now. So the sun is the sun card. We talked about that. The moon is the high priestess. Talked about that. Gemini, we have not covered yet, is the lovers in the tarot. So it's relationships and the importance of proximity and being in relation with others, and duality, dual personalities, sharing, and balance on the small scale. Not balance on the big scale like justice, but balance on the day-to-day. How do we share with one another? Are we oversharing, undersharing, trying to get that into equilibrium? So we can sort of see as we head into 2021, year of the Hierophant, that we're starting to recognize this need to connect with each other, right? To connect with one another. Being in relation and being in proximity, which we've been denied so much of this 2020 year of the Emperor, which was very dysfunctional. So this is going to be, I think, a precursor for the emphasis that we will see on community as well as on systems heading into 2021 once we're in the year of the Hierophant. The lovers, it's really, again, about sharing and managing that balance between one another and between over and under sharing. And by being in proximity, I think we can better understand one another and we can share burdens, right? I think that's something we need to be cognizant of these days, is how can we work together and share burdens. During the full moon, we mentioned what new moons are for intention setting, but during a full moon, this is a time to focus on what you would like to manifest in the fullness of time, and especially when harnessing the power of an eclipse. What would you like to manifest in the next, 6 months until the next eclipse season comes about? And when it comes to how do you phrase things or goal setting and asking intentional questions in your tarot work, this is a time to focus on what to get rid of, what to remove, what to extract from your life, what no longer serves you. How do you cut that out? Over the next few months, kind of think about, what do you need to get rid of from your life? What is no longer serving you and your higher good? And what do you want to manifest this winter and spring until the start of the next eclipse season? I hope that you learned something today, and if you are curious about learning more, would like to book a reading with me or take one of my classes, I encourage you to check out my website at learntarology.com. And thank you so much for sharing this space with me, and until we meet again, take care.